by the privileging of political and military spokespeople who emphasize the need to stay the course, and by the demonizing of the Taliban as an evil other that must be defeated to keep the world safe. And I don't deny that there is that out there, but I'd just like to take a minute here to talk about media analysis and media education. I know all of us have the experience of being really outraged by a particular story or set of stories. There are certain people, opinion columnists and reporters whose work I just can't look at because it'll upset me so much for the rest of the day. But I think that when you look at media, we all have to struggle to get past those knee-jerk responses, try to take a more global view. I agree that the mass media, the commercial mass media, have a lot of problems, and they're also not a classroom. They're not an academic institution, and they're not a public policy think tank. They aren't. They are a very imperfect vehicle for having a public conversation, and as any form of communication that we have is somewhat imperfect. Any of you who are on the internet for any length of time knows that dialogue there can be completely dominated by those with the greatest stamina for ranting. And all of us who work in the mass media are well aware of the constraints that we work under. Whether we like it or not, we're by and large run by a particular class of people with a particular worldview, by culture, and because of increasing economic restraints, we are disposed to relying on particular people and institutions for news and opinion. And we are caught between commercial imperatives and a journalistic mission. So the question for me always, when I'm looking at coverage that really bothers me, is yes, we distort this public conversation, this ideal public conversation that in the Habermas world we would all like to have. But in this particular issue, is there more distortion than usual? Or is the predilection for distortion particularly exaggerated in this case? And the distortions, of course, that we know can happen are, one point of view is privileged over others over the course of time. It can't be just one article or a series of articles, because that doesn't give you the global picture that's happening. Certain representatives get preferential amounts of space over the course of time. Editorials and opinion pieces tend to favor one point of view over the course of time, or commentators and news reporters use exceptionally loaded language. When you look at the coverage of Afghanistan, there is no doubt that certain issues, events, and types of speakers dominate, in spite of all the other different kinds of stories I told you about. They do, particularly in the last 6 months, particularly concern deaths, casualties, and the need for equipment, and military spokespeople and politicians get the most space. There are issues I really think we're not covering, and as somebody who was there, I'm still sort of perplexed by why I haven't seen an explanation for some of these things. What many people don't understand is it's really about the last 6 months that the issue of Canada's mission in Afghanistan has become so much in the public eye. That's because the troops moved to Kandahar in the south. When we were in Kabul and we were walking around handing out candy, and there were guys and women out in the hills still, conducting minor skirmishes and battles with various factions, we weren't paying much attention to it. Then the Canadian troops were reassigned to Kandahar, which was always the most problematic part of the country. When I was there, no one went to Kandahar if they could help it. If they did go, they weren't allowed to leave their hotels or their guest houses or the camp or wherever they were. There were always reports of deaths coming from there. So what shifted is not a new mission or something like that. It's that our troops moved to a different part of the country. If you'll notice, if you follow the coverage sort of obsessively. You'll notice that the Germans in the West, the British, and the Italians, I can't remember where everybody is now. Actually, I think the Germans are in the Northeast. I can't remember who's in the West. But the other countries are not experiencing the casualties we are, and they are not seeing the same kind of conflict. Kandahar has always been the problem area because of militias or insurgents being able to move back and forth across the border. So we're not explaining to people that that happened. We never did explain to people that the Canadian military came under the command of Operation Enduring Freedom between February and July. I've never seen an explanation for why that happened and what impact that might have had on their operations. In closing, and I am coming to a close, I would just like to bring up one point for those of you who are media educators that I would like to see examined, and that is the approach to media analysis. And I love media analysis. We do it every day in our newsroom. You won't find any more vicious critics of, the Vancouver Sun than the reporters who go for lunch and talk about it. But I do feel that there are a couple of things that media analysis in this particular issue is subject to. One is conflating American media with Canadian media, and making that the presumption that all the flaws of American reporting are present in Canada. I do think there is a difference between our two media cultures. We have different values in this country that, even middle-class, elderly white editors respond to. And we also have a government and a public that has a profoundly different relationship with the military establishment than what exists in the United States. Bob talked about the media being swayed by, the dollars, by dollars and influential groups. But in Canada, unlike the United States, we do not have a plethora of defense contractors who are lobbying the government. It's not that big an industry here. The military is very small. They do not have the dollars or the influence of the states. And in fact, the reason the coverage of the football, of the military efforts to combine with the CFL game in Winnipeg got so much coverage was because it was unusual that they were using this technique. And that was covered across the country. And people did make note of the fact that they were using this as a recruiting and sales vehicle. The second problem I see is that media analysis can fall into the same trap of using loaded language and privileging particular viewpoints as commercial media. Consider the title and description of this panel. Spinning the new military comes with a lot of subtext. Spinning is a word with a lot of baggage attached to it, and it implies a concerted effort to portray an issue in a false light. The new military implies that the role of the military has changed. That is one perspective, but it certainly isn't the only one. What the Canadian military are doing in Afghanistan looks different to us, but there are plenty of people out there who would say that's because we weren't paying any attention before, and because a certain amount of reflexive anti-Americanism has influenced our perception of what our military role should be. The Canadian soldiers I met in Afghanistan did not see what they were doing as a radical redefinition of their roles. They have always walked a difficult line between being peacekeepers and being soldiers. Many of them had served in Bosnia, where they had been involved in firefights and drawn out battles with local ethnic factions. They don't see themselves as part of a new military. They see themselves as the same old military, having to learn to operate in a rapidly changing world and style of conflict. So my challenge to you would be, before engaging your students or colleagues or whomever in discussions of media hegemony, that you look really carefully at the way you have framed the issue and the viewpoints you have privileged and the ones that you have ignored. Thanks.